that as it may, folks, it is 2:33 p.m. We will start the Personnel or Finance and Personnel Committee. And what I'd like to do, because we want to spend most of our time on ARP, let's just give a very, very abbreviated review over the financial statement. So Brian, if you'll start us with that. If you want to start us with the back page, which is just amazing.
Yeah, let's start with the back page. Income tax collection is surprising. So far, year to date, as of the end of April, we're at $1,614,000. That doesn't surprise me over last year because a lot of people just put off filing as soon as the world closed down. But that's our best year probably in history. And that's just incredibly surprising. On the breakout, which is, I believe, on page, what is it, 2? Individual is up 15%. Business is up 150% over last year. Withholdings up 4%. The only thing I can think of with business is, while the PPP money is not included in our tax things, all the money that people got from workers' comp, which was an incredibly large amount of money, the local stuff that we gave out through the CARES Act to the chamber, that gets included in their income. So, I think that there's in our town especially, being that we're not heavily tourism based, I think that our manufacturers and businesses just did surprisingly well and then got a cherry on the top.
Since you mentioned tourism based, let's be glad, with all due respect, be glad we're not Loudonville.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I'm also really happy to see withholding. It's what withholding is $1,008,000 for the year. It's up 4.5% over last year and almost 18% over the 3-year average. That definitely tells me that we've, it looks like wages are up. Obviously, we see a lot of hiring signs around town, so people could use more business, but that's a healthy sign there. And this is all before our tax deadline.
Yeah.
I should ask Sarah this morning what our percentage of collection is, but as far as returns that have actually come in, but we still have another couple days before returns are even due. So I'm really happy with that. I won't spend too much time on it. I'll go back to the first page real quick, and we'll kind of give you some.
Well, first, I'm looking at the monthly total for May or for April of this year.
Yeah, it's
over $600,000.
That's crazy. It's awesome. I'm thrilled. But it's very, very surprising.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at the front page.
Okay, the general fund, we've got 1.514 million in cash. It's 1.322 after encumbrances. We're up $213,000 for the year, and up $440,000 from this time last year. We did get our property tax payments, so you will see those reflected in the various accounts for the first half of the year. But that fund is very healthy. Well done to all the administration for keeping an eye on things, and really everybody for not making purchases or requesting purchases that aren't necessary. The street fund, you'll see we do have some expenditures now and some reserve for encumbrances. We are starting our projects. And you'll kind of see that throughout the various street and sidewalk funds and such. So nothing too surprising there. The health fund has a very healthy balance, 550,000 still.
Brian, back to the street fund, where you have the income, the percent of income, it says only 3%. Oh, I see that. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I was looking at, my eyes got crossed. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, and we have some grant projects and such that is why that balance isn't so high. We'll, you know, a lot of those are big one-time things. So that will even out hopefully later in the year as we get those funds. Hopefully.
Okay.
So yeah, health fund is very healthy. They're up 20,000 for the year. The park fund is up 75,000 for the year, which is also not surprising because they really haven't started a lot of their major expenditures for the year, but they have received their property tax. Nothing too notable through the 200s. The coronavirus relief fund, that still has $18,000 unencumbered. You know, we've been talking about a taxi purchase with those funds, but we have till the end of the year to expend those, so still plenty of time. Capital improvements, that fund has a very healthy balance. Once again, we haven't really started a lot of those purchases and such yet. Streets and alleys, much like the other streets, they have a healthy balance, and we will be having more expenditures come out of there as we get the contracts finalized. Sewer, line 400. This is our problem child. Amber, Steve, John, and I had a discussion yesterday. We do have 160,000 in there. 66,000 is encumbered, leaving us 94. Once again, some of those encumbrances are administrative costs that will be taken out throughout the rest of the year, but that fund is getting kind of a little bit too okay, we need to do something situation. So later in the year, we're going to get a sizable contract from one of the manufacturers in town. And John thinks that if we make it that far, then the fund will support itself on its own. We talked that potentially some of these ARPA funds, if we make up for the lost revenue from last year, which is, yeah, I know, like that's the discussion is how we
I've got that page dog-eared.
So that could be an issue, and I hadn't read that during our discussion yesterday. You know, we obviously are able to transfer funds from the general fund if council chooses, and we have some time to do that, but 2 months from now, we might have to have that discussion.
When does this contract go into effect?
I want to say September,
October.
October.
October is realistic. Brian, can I add, just fresh off the press this morning, I don't know if you've seen the emails. I was mostly talking to John a little bit about this. And he'll probably want to talk more about it next meeting too, but he wanted us to lead into it. The administrative costs, I know they're already appropriated, PO created. Do we have to keep doing the administrative costs for the sewer funds? The question. Can we cancel it for the rest of the year, or even potentially, in a sense, refund what's already been transferred to the general fund? That's a question he wanted me to bring to this committee.
Well, let me be, which services then will the general fund not do for the sewer fund?
Right, that's why he wanted me to bring that question.
Will you no longer do the payroll?
Nope.
Will the mayor no longer be the chief operating officer over the sewer fund? I understand the point, but again, the bigger issue is that the general fund provides essential services for all of these revenue funds. So, Nathan,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, the question, can we, is always a tricky one. The question for me is, ought to, and I don't think we ought to. I think that the issue for me is that it sets a dangerous precedence that the administration fees are willy-nilly and arbitrary and not necessary. Now, obviously, transferring money from the general fund, if we so choose to do a stopgap, that's one thing. But I don't ever want to tie it to being a refund or anything associated with the administrative fees.
Well, I think that,
That.
yeah.
Both those comments make sense. So anyway, so that'll be a discussion and John will bring up utilities, but we're gonna keep an incredibly close eye on that and just a fair warning for the future.
Well, let me say what people I think don't want to say. If everything has been done in the sewer fund to cut expenses and the revenue is still insufficient, then folks, we're looking at a general rate increase. No one ever likes to say that. No elected ever likes to say that. But you know, the precedent of subsidizing an enterprise fund with general tax revenues is equally repugnant. So,
Okay.
Nathan, have fun in your next meeting, right?
May I
Yeah.
may I chime in here? I think it has been explained that we had, Amber, if you refresh my memory, some $90,000 of a revenue difference, pretty well tied to COVID-19
Right.
in this fund, plus a loss of leachate revenues. So there's been quite a bit of loss of revenue, I think, which will be made up in the fall coming into winter. I think it'll be fine then. It was just like a stopgap. I think when we talk about the rescue funds and so forth, I think that's what it was designed for. When you have loss of revenue, substantial loss of revenue, that should be replenished by this Recovery Act. So I think that side of the coin really needs to be looked at. It's not due to mismanagement or probably really rates. It's just as a loss of revenue, loss of, a
Yes.
lot less water being used for some reason or other. And John has all those figures. He'll probably bring those out next meeting.
Well, friends, we've touched on this twice, and we're going to jump into it. I'm looking at page 51 of the interim rule. Talks about revenue loss and it talks about general revenue. But then when you get to page 55, first full paragraph, fourth line down, the definition of general revenue also would exclude revenue generated by utilities and insurance trusts. I don't
Bingo.
think they could get any more clear. And I tell you, I did a double take when I read that last night and highlighted it and dog-eared the page because I knew, Brian, you and I had talked a little bit about that. But here they're very specific.
Yeah, there's,
And
we'll get to this in a second, but it's, there's a lot of things in here that I'm kind of disappointed because a lot of our great ideas are not going to work out, I think. But yeah, that one's pretty clear.
So,
Well, you wonder who crafted that when you think of how many municipalities are probably facing the exact same thing with the loss of revenue from their, especially on the water side. It's quite fascinating.
Well, I think it's, if you think about it, it makes sense. It's exactly what Councilman Gates was talking about. An enterprise fund is supposed to be self-sustaining. And if enterprise fund is not self-sustaining, it shouldn't be propped up with taxpayer money. There's other ways to make it, quote unquote.
But in the midst of a pandemic, that's the idea of this whole thing. I thought this was not a normal year in 2020. Revenues were not normal, not because of any other factor, virtually, but the pandemic itself.
well, it's a good thought, but let's, I know I interrupted, but because we had touched on it and I thought we might as well get this out of the way. Let's continue down on page 1 here, some of the highlights.
Yeah. Water fund is holding its own. They're up 15,000 for the year. I think after encumbrances, they got almost 143,000. So that's comfortable. Electric fund also is just hanging in there. I think they're up 57,000 with a 4.3 326 after encumbrances. So those funds are both healthy. Nothing too shocking through the rest of the page. The hospitalization fund is up 57,000. So, we're looking better and better for potentially skipping a month later in the year.
Yeah.
All in all, we've got 15,280,000 in cash. It's still 12.8 million after encumbrances, and we're up 488,000 for the year. So we're hanging in there pretty well.
Good, good. I know we have the annual comparisons and things like that. Let's, is there anything that we really need to look at here? I want to zip, people can pretty much do this on their own.
No, I don't really have anything else that's surprising
Okay.
or the ordinary.
All right. Anything on the cash investment reconciliation? How's our interest doing?
It's not.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Okay.
It might keep up with inflation. No, it's not going to keep up with inflation, fortunately.
No, it's, inflation has outstripped interest rates for any number of years.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's it on the financial statement. Mayor, what have you for us on personnel?
Okay, there we go. Yes, there is some movement in the police department. I do have an application, resume, and background check for a potential police officer. And I believe that the fire department is getting ready to start interviews with 4 candidates.
Okay. Do you
I am
have,
out. So that's about all the information I have. Amber, do you have any more information?
We had our new lineman start this past Monday, Cody Cross. He's the new crew chief for the line
Yeah.
department.
Thank you.
He's officially started.
new crew chief? Okay. And that was, Mayor, 4 interviews in fire?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And with the police, you said you've got the paperwork. Do you have a kind of a ballpark when a decision can be made?
Usually it takes at least a couple of weeks. So we'll go from there.
Okay, I'll put couple weeks in quotes.
Yes, or with a question mark behind it.
Couple weeks, question mark, plus or minus. How's that?
I love it. I love it.
That gives enough wiggle room.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay,
That's about it, I believe.
all right. We'll touch insurance. What's the deal on any more thoughts about bidding the insurance?
Do you want to start or shall I?
Well, why don't you? Because you kind of had the ball rolling there.
Okay. Yeah, so, essentially it all started with a local insurance agency asked us last year if they could quote our policy. And, while nothing is that simple, they did express interest and there's a potential savings there. And also, just the general, I'm not really sure how long it's been bid out, or not that I really, we're happy with our services, but just as sort of a check figure. So I reached out with Larry Paxton on the city of Ashland and got a name of a consultant that they used last time they bid it out, which, in general, I can see that the purpose of a consultant in this venue, because there's so many different aspects of insurance more than price. And even just to look at a policy and compare it is well beyond the uneducated eyes ability to make sense of. So, I think that the first step is probably to reach out to this person or someone else in the field, kind of see, what's it cost for the consultation. And if they think it's a worthwhile idea to pursue the potential idea of bidding it out again. Steve and I talked earlier, and we think that's a fair start to just kind of see if it's worthwhile, because obviously if you're going to bid out a several year, 5-year, whatever contract, even a $15,000 a year savings is a pretty big savings. So, maybe we might end up sticking with our same firm because we're happy with them. But at least it'll keep everybody on their toes. So
Sure. When do you expect to have this consultant?
I'll reach out to him this week. I can send him, get a hold of him tomorrow and kind of get the ball rolling so we can.
Okay, so you'll have something in greater detail for Monday night then, you hope?
Yeah, hopefully if they have time in their schedule. If not, the next council meeting.
Okay. Because I'm trying to think what the policies we'd have. There's automotive. You're going to have property, fire and casualty, and the liability with that. The police, and also, well, I don't know who all's covered in that, but we'll just put it under the general category of professional liability, which would cover all of us electeds and staff people. Of course, that's going to be very different than the professional liability insurance for safety. Well, let's be specific, for the police department, which who knows what's happening nationwide with insurance for law enforcement. So, well, yeah, reach out and, have something for us Monday night, and we'll see how it goes from there. This is obviously much more complicated than, any one of us getting a policy for our car. It's much more complicated when you get into commercial lines than individual. So, okay. Well, anything else before we attack the 600-pound gorilla in the room? All right. Well, this was wonky reading at best, but the eligible uses, and there's another whole section, after ineligible, or what prohibited or whatever the title is, that would probably be equally as important to read. But well, I'll do this. What was anyone's takeaway from these 60-some pages?
Well, I'll be happy to start. Obviously it was an interesting read because there's a lot of justification for their actions, and then all of a sudden 3 pages later you find the allowed use or a definition. So it was definitely a tough read. I'm kind of a little bummed, just like with them excluding utilities. I thought, I was just sitting on the CIC board. I thought that maybe we could do whatever we wanted for some of the nonprofits and such, but it kind of sounded to me like we have to justify that it's an amount that they lost due to COVID-19. And maybe I'm reading that wrong.
No, I think you're right.
Good. Well, not good, but, and then I don't know, Nathan, if you had much a chance to read the broadband section, because a lot more than I did, but it seemed to me like if people are getting 25 megabytes per second and already, that we can't use these funds for that.
Well, I read 100, I think somewhere, but I know.
Yeah, so there's actually competing sections, which, so it actually said it says that we should prioritize 100 megabytes. It also said that even in areas, well, here, by contrast, as noted below, many households,
Nathan, excuse me, which page?
oh, I'm on page 70.
Thank you.
It says, even in areas where broadband infrastructure exists, broadband access may be out of reach because it's unaffordable. And then the prioritized list, it doesn't mention, it says you should prioritize low areas, but it doesn't say that you can't go to areas that aren't low areas. And then in another section, and again, I'm going off of part memory here, but in another section, it states that priority should be given to local governments doing municipal broadband because they have little incentive for profit. So it was very competing. Everything we met fine, except for that one section which says it should be used and in areas that don't have access. But then in another section, it said it should be prioritized. It didn't mention the language of use. So it does seem competing. I personally, I read that one sentence and I was like, oh man. Then I read the entirety of it and I was like, you know what? I think there's a case where we can actually do this and we wouldn't get in any legal trouble because the way the rule is written and in several different areas.
You know, my take on it, and I'm reading page 75, the last sentence, where it says the interim final rule treats users as being underserved if they lack access to a wireline connection capable of reliably delivering at least the minimum speeds of 25 megabytes download and 3 megabytes upload.
Yeah, so, but read the first sentence. It says, under the interim final rule, eligible projects are expected to focus on locations that are unserved or underserved. And I will say this, we have areas in our town that meet that definition. Technology Parkway, for example. Technology Parkway does not have any infrastructure going to most of it that has any broadband capability whatsoever. There are parts of town, even like north of town, that have no CenturyLink and Spectrum do not reach out to them. And so yes, we should focus on those locations as we would be, because the whole plan is for us to take care of everybody, la-di-da-di, everybody inside of our community. So I understand what you're saying, Brian, but that's why because of that issue, the issue of focus or prioritize, I completely think that we are eligible to do that, because we will be. We're not going to exclude those areas. And considering the block of everything else within it, I think we're well within the scope of the rule. As it is in this interim, and remember it says interim final rule. That's kind
What
of
does that mean?
that's a bureaucratic oxymoron if ever I met one. Given that exact sentence, I think that we are fully. In fact, I have that dog-eared. I have that highlighted as my reasoning why we are fully within the realms of eligibility.
Yeah, you know, and you mentioned that talking about prioritizing local governments, which is I think you're referencing the last sentence of page 76. The way I read that was that they're hoping that you partner with an organization and concentrate on like the last mile hookups. And when they say partnership, they would prefer that we partner with another town or nonprofit versus.
You have to understand how this is written, right? This is not written with local governments in mind. This is written with state governments in mind.
Okay.
And so when they wrote this rule, they're thinking on their rationality, and you can tell when it specifies like, hey, state, look at how Illinois is handling it, right? And it goes through that. I read this extensively, and I think they're writing it from the advent of, okay, Ohio is going to try to reach their areas. They're not necessarily writing it with a local government in mind. It doesn't mean that we are ineligible to do that, obviously, because we're getting the same funds. And I'm just saying that that's my understanding for why they would reach that. But that's also why they said it should be prioritized to local governments. So,
Makes sense.
which it makes sense. This is why we want to go down this venture in the first place, is because we want to have something two-pronged. First of all, something that is beholden to First Amendment qualifications of the Constitution, and not have carte blanche to go against those as a private company, but also being able to not have the quote unquote profit motive as our number one motive. Customer service and constituents are our number one motive. And I think this all falls within line of that.
Anyone else have anything that they jumped off the pages at them?
Well, I thought like, actually, when you got to page 78 and 79 under Roman numeral 3, restrictions on use, that those two fairly long paragraphs were very helpful and descriptive. I kind of thought this is what we were looking at all along. When I first started reading, certain phrases and words popped out at me, like negative economic impacts of COVID-19. And we were all, thinking that was going to be the common denominator to everything. I guess it is in a way. Then I read the terms economic harm, implementing infection prevention measures, nursing homes came up. Public health got quite a bit of space, but of course we all know that has been addressed. We still have some $200,000 to spend in public health measures relating to COVID-19 and future infections and pandemics and viruses. Then the phrase impacts on businesses showed up, assistance to unemployed workers, assistance to households, small business and nonprofits, aid to impacted industries. And then, of course, Mr. Gates, you referenced the revenue loss, investments in infrastructure, water, sewer, broadband. So those are some phrases that popped out at me. But it was a longer read than I thought it would be, and encompassed more than I thought would originally be covered with the plan.
I'm glad it was double spaced. One thing that obviously the sorry, water and sewer revenues, but on page 63 where it talks about water and sewer infrastructure, and if you turn to page 67, this really jumped off the page at me. The last line in that first full paragraph: given the lifelong impacts of lead exposure for children and the widespread nature of lead service lines, Treasury encourages recipients to consider projects to replace lead service lines. We identified how many in, from Gamble to Broadway, Mansfield Avenue. I will tell you that when I read this, and I called John this morning and told him that this was one thing, and he sounded, dare I say, excited to hear that. I don't know how widespread lead service lines are around town. I'm sure that John knows where they are. So, and quite honestly, other than with the broadband, this was the clearest suggestion in the whole 60 some pages. Replace lead service lines. So, that's one that first of all, we know it's a public health hazard. We've known it for decades. And again, this was clear as a bell. This is the clearest suggestion in all of this documentation.
And it's kind of interesting how does that tie into the COVID-19? But it is a health issue. We understand that.
Yeah.
And of course, with Main Street replacing lead service lines. So kind of,
Well, Mayor, to some extent, we've tipped our hand with that, so to speak. We've shown our hand. If we think that it's important to replace those lead service lines in the central business district, it should be just as equally important that we replace them out in the neighborhoods. Now, I know the timetable. I know why we're doing it in the central business district. Obviously, you only want to dig once.
right. Right.
But again, if it's important to replace them here, it's important to replace them everywhere.
Yeah,
Well-
I definitely agree with Garland as far as any idea that we have had. I think the most easily approved one would be the service lines with water. And I'm sure that we could use all of these funds on it because there's a lot of old lines in this town.
Well, and
Whether the service lines.
again, Mayor,
I was just saying, I was reminding Mr. Crum, they're talking about the lead service lines.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, lines going between, wouldn't be talking about the lines going between the.
Not parallel, but yeah, going from
connection.
the supply to the
service line goes into a house.
perpendicular to the main trunk line. Yeah.
Right. Well, something else to think about too is that Richland County is getting what, $23 million? We're part of Richland County. So we should not be shy in the least about going to the county commissioners and say, gentlemen, here's a project that qualifies. We want a portion of of the funds that are under your jurisdiction.
Yeah, I agree. And in some of the presentations, they've talked about not just at the county level, but all kinds of various organizations that offer grants for this sort of stuff. So we can potentially make it go a lot longer if we go that route. That's definitely something. On a slightly different note, going back to revenue loss, for just my general quick reference, it looks like you take your 2019 revenues and then you can, what do they call it, counterfactual, but essentially you up it by 4.1% or something a year.
Yes.
But so I think we could probably allocate some monies. Of course, they also say I think you need to take your total revenue from all sources, and some of our revenues did a lot better than our income tax. I don't think that we're probably going to qualify after 2020 just because of how income tax collections and property tax collections have looked so far this year. So
it's I'm looking at 53. I think that's the first place. Is this definition of general revenue, which is something evidently that gets reported to the census and commerce. Yeah, top of page 54 is where general revenue is defined. So
yeah.
I wonder if in this initial rollout, if there will be any modifications to these rules. What I'm saying? If you can make an appeal, and if there would be some modification. I'm just curious about that.
well, in this rule is again the interim final. It's there's a definite rule making process that Uncle has, where they say here's our proposed rule and it's open for comments. And there were any number of these questions in italics throughout. So I think they probably are anticipating the questions that people will have. So what percentage of this document do we have in front of us will be the real final rule remains to be seen. But this is the best thing we have at present. So
Right. Well, we were talking the other day, administratively. I just believe everyone needs to kind of read through and put some things on paper what they think would be, good long-term investments that are connected to COVID-19 recovery and mitigation in the future of viruses and infections. And we began to draw up a list so we can all sit down and discuss them and come up with some priority projects. How does that sound?
I think, yeah, I mean, sure, that's a good starting point. I shared this with Brian. I think we should have fewer larger projects than lots of little ones, particularly lots of little ones that somehow could be slotted into, general operations. Something that would cost $20,000 seems to me that, we can put that into our regular budget.
Yep.
Again, looking at the magnitude of lead line replacement, looking at broadband, and whatever else. The next thing that I want to do is, Brian, why don't you ask Stacy to print me out, what is it, section, the one on where we ended? Restrictions. I want Roman numeral 3, restrictions on use. That'll be my next reading assignment, and I think should be it for the rest of us. Here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. They're opposite sides of the same coin.
Right. Good.
I was surprised, Nathan, when I read the part on broadband, how specific they were as far as speeds and things like that.
Well, I was thrilled actually, because the actual terminology for broadband is, and they even said it doesn't make sense. When the average household needs over 100 megabits per second, why in the world are we saying that broadband is quote unquote broadband at 15 megabits?
Because it sounds good if you're a private enterprise selling that.
It's exactly right. And so I was really pleased with the level of detail they went, and they went to a lot of detail.
Yes.
I'm glad, because it's about time and they also basically said, hey, our rules for these grants are archaic. And just because you have access, quote unquote, doesn't mean you can afford it. And there might be better ways to look at it as being underserved. So I was a little discouraged when I read that one part, but then when I started reading everything in its totality and that one sentence where it said prioritize, and then also what was the terminology? It was along the lines of synonymous with prioritize. Then I think we're still on track.
Well, that was no surprise. That was the last section. It was the last section I read. It was about 10 o'clock at night, and I wouldn't want to admit to say I was nodding off during that, but I will, Nathan, I will commit to rereading that section on broadband and a little fresher mind. So, folks,
as you can imagine, it was the first section I read, and I read it like a dozen times.
I'm shocked.
I mean, I picked up on that too, of the speeds. My big takeaway is just a little food for thought here. Spectrum did just recently, for the residential customers, increase their minimum speed to 200 now for their minimum. So I know they're not in every area of town, so yes, but where they do cover it, they are, I think, well aware of this too, what they need to supply for their customers.
Yeah, there was an email in my city account from Spectrum. I glossed over it, so I'll print that out and read it in greater detail. So I thought, I don't believe in coincidences. Things happen when they happen for a particular reason, and that email from Spectrum happened right now for a particular reason. So, but I wouldn't want to speculate any more than that. That would be unfair. So, All right, well, let's, I think we need to, again, read the restrictions on use. And go from there. So is there anything else then for us in the committee today?
One quick thing- Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. One real quick thing. Do you guys want me to keep sending you presentations that pop up? Because I'm sure we're gonna have a whole other slew of them now that this guidance has been issued.
Well, they're going to be more substantive than the ones we've gotten before, Sure, yeah, send them.
It doesn't hurt to get them in your email, so
Yeah.
I'll keep those coming.
Is there anything else? If not, it is 3:18 and we will adjourn. But before we do that, because I didn't mention for the record, because I know we're doing a recording, who is present here today. So we have Mayor Steve Shag, Brian Crum, Amber Cutlip, Nathan Martin, myself, Garland Gates, and Joe was here to begin and he's here at the end. So we'll give we'll say that Joe was present with us because so if there's nothing else, then we are adjourned at 3:19 p.m. Thank you very much.
Always present.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.